Okay, King of Drag popped off severely this week, and I am living so hard for this particular episode. It feels like we finally hit a stride, and I hope that they stick with this. Drag to me is a celebration of artistry, of creativity, of allowing someone to focus their very specific and unique point of view of drag through a challenge, whether that be a character or a number, and how that art sprouts and grows through their interpretation of that theme. Hi, hello everyone, my name is Jer, and we are talking about King of Drag Season 1, Episode 3. I am so glad that so many of you are watching this season and are keeping up with it with me. I hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as I did because we got a lot of good stuff to talk about. This episode tore a very small page out of the Boulay Brothers Dragula format for how to structure a drag competition, and I'm not mad at that at all. Give the contestants a challenge and ask them to figure out how their drag aligns with that challenge, and then present it on the stage with however they want to interpret that prompt. Again, I like this format the best of everything we've seen so far because it allows us to see their unique perspective on drag, how they view themselves, and based off the topic, we get just a little more vulnerability into that person that's underneath the artist. Yes, this is great. Group challenges, improv challenges, acting, and the like are all things that we as an audience have been primed by shows like Drag Race to expect the average drag performer to be able to do. But the reality is that most drag performers around the world are not improving and acting in their local bars. I mean, some are, but it's not gonna be every show. It's not even gonna be every other show. And sometimes those challenges can be outright uncomfortable to watch. I do love a good musical group challenge every now and again. Allow us to see the drag artists work together. I like to see their abilities in dancing and in blocking come to life. But improv in particular is super tough because not every drag artist is an improv artist. Not everyone has those innate abilities to be able to volley and banter and chat with an audience. And that's a lot of what improv is. It's reading the room, connecting, and volleying with them. I liked week 1 well enough because boy bands are fun. Again, group choreography and musical numbers are a good time sometimes. And I enjoyed the idea of what last week's improv challenge was, but again, not everyone who is a drag artist can do improv. I've really seen this season as being something that's super experimental. One that is trying to get its sea legs, so to speak, and figure out where it wants to go. And I think this is the episode where it really figured that out. And I think the competition absolutely has gotten off the ground this week. In my observational opinion, it comes across to me like King of Drag is sort of just throwing all the pasta at the walls and seeing what sticks. And I think that is super valid for an experimental pilot season. Look at Dragula in particular. There are so many of those early challenges that we do not see anymore and that we probably never will see ever again because they were trying to figure out what they wanted to do and how they wanted to direct the show. And after a while, they found their groove, they stuck to their thing, and it's a great formula now. And I think King of Drag is very slowly trying to figure out what it wants to do. I hope to God it gets a season 2 so that we can really see it start to soar. I've done so many references. Ocean, flight, plants. The theme of this week is horror, which I am super here for as someone who is an ultra fan of spookier, scary, dark drag. The weenie challenge was horror light, like really, really light. Asking the kings to do a half glam look and a half monstrous look, and they only had a very short amount of time to get that done. There were a lot of fun looks and a lot of interesting interpretations of what Bo meant to them. But at the end of the day, Perka did the damn thing, showcasing this incredible artistry off that they got to show in week 1, but didn't really get to tap into for Celebrity Illusion. And I think what was most intelligent was that brain headpiece, because it allowed the entire look to come together in a cohesive and interesting way. And Perka is budding into a king on this show that I was not really expecting. I thought Perka was gonna be an early out, but now they are showing that they could be a really viable contender. And I'm here for that. And then the beefy challenge is to be inspired by their greatest fear interpret that through a look and then present that on the stage. Yes, this is so good. This is so damn fun, and I am absolutely ecstatic that horror icon King Landon Cider got to be here to judge this particular episode. Can I also say, I knew of Landon for years before he got on Dragula. I didn't realize that his name was a pun until the Boulets mentioned it on their podcast. Land inside her. I mentioned that on my Twitch stream, and one of my followers said, "You really are gay to not understand a joke about being inside of a woman." Which was hateful. Accurate. But very hateful. Landon is such a star, he has such a presence, and it was great to see him here, and I could see how much he was connecting with these drag kings, and probably just so excited to see people do something within his wheelhouse, and also within their own unique perspective. I loved this week getting to learn more about players like Henlo, Pressure, and Perka, who all three of them got really deep stories. And I think it makes sense Perka was the winner this week. Pressure ended up going home, and I think that Henlo is being set up to either go home next week or make it to the finale. They have such an interesting and unique sense of drag. I can't help but wonder where their story is gonna go, because they keep showing us these deeper sides of Henlo, and that makes me feel, television-wise, that Henlo's got more journey yet to be seen. And I enjoyed the vulnerability that we got to see from each one of these contestants this week. So let's jump into the performances, because that's really the beef of this challenge. Beef. Perka opens the show on an incredibly high bar, because this was true horror to me. This wobbly kneed character getting berated by this invisible force that inevitably condemns them and tells them they're not good enough and dead names them and tells them that they will never refer to them as the identity that they see themselves as. Taking the trans flag and the American flag and holding on to this extreme nationalism over loving your kid. God, I have chills talking about it. The look with the lock on the front, literally being tied into this family dynamic and being unable to get out. And I think so many of us can identify with being that wobbly-legged kid who's just trying to be honest and authentic with your family, only to be rejected by them. I shed a small tear because it was really powerful and it was scary. And the challenge concept was to take your biggest fear and show that on the stage. And Perka's biggest fear realized is seeing their parents not accept them and tell them, "I will never, ever validate who you are." That fear is the winner in the end, because that's what the challenge called for. It was powerful, it was political, it was emotional. Perka did the thing, and I totally 100% understand why they won. And I want to commend them for being so vulnerable and so open, because that's got to be hard to do, especially in front of cameras. I do, however, wish that Perka would take just a really small shot of confidence, just a little one, because even after the really positive critiques that they got, they're sitting in the man cave saying that they should be in the bottom and should go home because their performance was bad. And I wish that Perka would just understand that they have such a unique perspective on what they do, and that what they do is interesting and good. And everyone can tell Perka all day long how good they are, but if Perka doesn't believe it, then it's never going to sink in. I hope that this competition allows Perka to become a more realized version of Perka Sex. Alexander was doing a performance based on fast fashion. Listen, I am not here to police anyone's greatest fears. I think that the world getting destroyed by human invention and human waste is a genuinely real fear for a lot of people. It is something that I fear as well. And there are a lot of global warriors who are out there really fighting and championing for more sustainability. I think that it's a great message for another runway prompt. When I think, what am I most afraid of? I think my mind would drift to what some of the others in the room did. Being rejected by family, falling into a void, the time passing by that you become so old that you don't recognize who you are anymore. Even loosely what Pressure did of these evils getting to you. But fear of fast fashion, I think for me it just lacked depth. It lacked vulnerability. This was a great opportunity to tear that performer right open and show who's on the inside. And I think Alexander was resistant very heavily towards doing that. On top of it, the look was so oddly translated to the theme. I was extremely confused by the choice to make a quilt, because in my head, that is the polar opposite of fast fashion. Making a quilt to that nature requires a lot of patterning to make sure that the squares are the same size. It's a lot of work to cut everything up and then put it back together. That's kind of the antithesis of fast fashion quilting, right? Fast fashion is significantly less methodical. So even on a technical level of costume design, it didn't quite make sense. And then the blue face that was almost icy, but then looked like the globe from far away, was really discordant with the rest of the body. Sorry, Alexander, it was a chop to me. I completely understand why he went home this week, but it was nice to learn a little more about him and what makes him tick. I wish that we could have seen maybe a little more vulnerability this week. Molasses was making a commentary on the fear of the unknown. I majorly give props to the artistry of committing to this jet black head to toe makeup. Even painting the legs. That long-armed suit that was very Slender Man, and the slow movements were jarring and unsettling, a bit uncanny. And I'm reminded of those sci-fi horror flicks that rely on silence and ambient sound to freak you out. They're not doing a lot of crazy sounds or jump scares. They want you to be afraid of the unknown and the void that's around these main characters. They're floating in the absence of anything in space, unknowing where they're going, and there's no sound. So everything is just a little uncomfortable. All season, I think Molasses has been creating moments where they're skirting outside the box of what the challenge is, but not so far that it's such a crazy departure. Like last week, doing an improv comedy challenge and having this restrained comedic timing, which I think was brilliant. A lot of people went a little batshit with that improv, and Molasses chose to be a more quiet version of comedy, which was super effective. And this week, everyone went super conceptual with it, which I think Molasses also did, but I think they were a little more overt into the like, rawr, it's scary, where Molasses just used that silence to create tension and fear. And that was such an interesting take on the challenge. I completely agree with their placement in the top this week. Big D went for comedy this week. I chuckled. I think doing a commentary on anxiety and mental health, of being in your own head and being in your own way, and then tearing open this giant forehead to reveal a tiny version of yourself that you are literally in your own head, was not only an insane and a lunatic approach to this challenge, but was so brilliant and so well done. Very 80s sea horror movie. I lived. Horror and comedy meet at this perfect intersection, right where the off-ramp is to get onto the camp freeway. And so I liked this approach, whereas everybody else went a little more scary, that we saw Big D take a slightly different route to it, in the same way that Molasses did, and I liked that. My only nitpick is something that's already been said. It's a super boring opinion. I think the shoes probably could have been just a little bit more glam. It's a drag competition. I totally understand if you need those orthopedic shoes, but get some stylish ones. Also, I do think the performance was a little bit familiar to what we saw with that sort of helter-skelter Rocky performance that was very post-verbal. It seems like that's the lane that Big D is comfortable in, and I would love to see them branch away from that. But again, it was a very good week for Big D outside of those small critiques. Pressure was out next, doing initially what I was very confused by, and then that confusion lingered, the coat came off, and then I was more confused. The words on the cloak were really hard to read. All I could catch were a couple of the 7 deadly sins. So I was thinking, oh my god, we're gonna get something that's gonna be super interesting and conceptual underneath it all. But then it was just pressure in another sporty jersey. I thought maybe it would be something with religious undertones. I thought we would get, I don't know. There are so many routes that you could take. And then also revealing to say, no, you're not gonna get me. I thought that the prompt that they were going for was being consumed by evil, but then the way that the performance resolves is that they're not consumed by evil. So is their greatest fear that they can't battle the darkness that looms over them? Is that what the commentary was supposed to be? Because I got a little lost. And so I completely understand why Pressure was eliminated this week. This did not happen during Pressure's moment, it happened during Alexander's, but this moment of Sasha saying, "I didn't get it," is going to be my new reaction meme for all time forever. It was so good. But that was how I felt about Pressure's "I didn't get it." Dick Van Dyke was criminally underrated yet again and completely overlooked. If Dick is safe for one more challenge, I'm gonna crash out like no commentator ever has ever. I'm glad that my handsome icon is still in for one more week. I just would have loved if they were top 3. Dick created a Dragula level concept and executed that so well. This clock look representing the passing of time and then revealing to this almost corpsey makeup was fascinating. There were so many great references I was getting from it, and I wish that he had been able to get some top critiques. I personally would have swapped out Big D with Dick Van Dyke because I think Dick was a little more committed to the entire look, where again, there were just small little nitpicks that I had with Big D's. And I thought this clock look from Dick was an interesting commentary on not only the passing of time, but also on gender. Charles was out next doing a Day of the Dead inspirational look and doing a conversation on self-harm, which I think is an important topic that needs to be navigated with sensitivity. And I think that Charles definitely did that. I appreciated as well the show putting warning labels at the top and bottom of the episodes, allowing people to understand that if they're feeling anything, if they are feeling the need to self-harm, that they have options and resources to reach out to. I think the way that they approached this conversation was super sensitive. I really am very glad that Charles is still with us. As someone who has dealt with similar feelings, it's really tough when you get in that headspace because it's hard to get out of it and find your worth. And I hope that Charles feels their worth in the world, especially now that they have such a big platform to be able to present their art on. I will say the look was just a little low key. I agreed with the judges on that. I think where everybody else went super balls to the walls, Charles was a little bit safer in their approach, and that may have just been simply because a Dia de los Muertos look is going to be a little more restrained and is not going to be bombastic and loud. I would have loved to have seen something that was like a glitter fabric or a sequin fabric to create the tuxedo so that it was garish and draggy like we would expect from any drag competition. Make all of the shapes even bigger and more lavish and extravagant. Maybe that's outside of the budget, and I respect if that's the case. I think that's what could have elevated it to a safer position because everyone else was just so committed. Henlo was gross this week in the best way. Definitely Dragula levels of whoa. And Landon was very clearly living for it. I love the grossness of the look, the slime, the ick, the ooze. I was very sad that the blood prop didn't work because I think that would have been so impactful, and the judges wanted it. They were like, yes, 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 give it to me. It was another edge session that never finished. I love drag that makes my mouth curl downwards and go, ugh, because grotesque horror drag is so different than what I'm used to, but I live for it on Dragula. So seeing another competitor on a outside competition from the Dragula space embrace that filth, oh, I was living. And I definitely wanted at least one grotesque look from this category, and so I'm glad we got it. As a matter of fact, now that I'm talking about it, we kind of got everything that I wanted to see from this challenge. We got someone who went very in-your-face scary about it, like Perka. We got someone who did the more restrained, uncomfortable, tense horror, like what we saw with Molasses doing. We got camp, like what Big D did, and then we had Henlo doing gross horror. So kind of every mark that I wanted to get hit was seen on this runway, and that was cool to me. I personally would not be mad if Henlo wanted to audition for Dragula season 7 or 8, because I think they would make a great addition based off what we've seen so far. I think their perspective on drag is interesting, and I love their thesis of who Henlo is as a drag character. I think they could go quite far in Dragula. Perka won this week's challenge, which I completely 100% agreed with. And this week we were gagged because 2 competitors are going home. I guess this makes sense because there's only 6 episodes total. So mathematically, there would have to be a number of people eliminated before the finale, depending on if they're doing a 4 or 5 person finale.
That'll be 1 + 1 + 2 + 1, not 1 + 2 + 1 + 1.
And the final thrust is to enact a death scene in however they wanted to in a Blair Witch style found footage improv / acting mini challenge. I think for me, it was a tie between Charles and Pressure. Pressure saying that's what I get for smoking the free green, but the other word because of YouTube monetization, I thought was so funny. And Charles was a super fun and compelling actor, and so I liked seeing how he portrayed this. Alexander unfortunately came off a little hokey pokey and a little canned, which I think has been their problem since week 1. Alexander is such a theater kid, and sometimes you have to scale back just a little bit, dial back that volume. We don't want to sing at Denny's, we want to enjoy our Grand Slam and then maybe sing some show tunes in the parking lot, you know? So that the other patrons are not disturbed. And I think that was kind of Alexander's problem. And this genuinely felt tense. I kind of figured that Alexander was going to be the one eliminated. They didn't really tackle the final thrust in the way that I think Pressure and Charles did. So then I thought, who has more to give to not only the TV, but also the competition? Because this is a reality show on some level. And I think between Pressure and Charles, Charles has just a little more story that is creeping up. I think that Pressure's storyline kind of wrapped this week. This may have been the first time where I noticed any television happening. And I think maybe even the editors are getting a good stride on how they want to tell stories. I think in any competition show, there are stories that are there, and we as the audience can either pick those up and be privy to them, or the editors can restrain them from us. I think it's good to create a little bit of that longing feeling of your audience liking the contestants by creating small stories and allowing small things to crop up. And I think that Charles has just a little bit more than Pressure does in that regard of television. I loved Pressure's goodbye message of saying that we're not responsible for what happened to us, but we are responsible for how we move forward. I thought that was beautiful, and I really appreciated getting to learn more about him this week. So what did you think about this challenge? I personally loved it. I was so glad that they hit this particular stride, and I would love to see if it's more of this in the coming weeks. Give them a theme and a prompt, ask them to interpret that, and then present it. That's honestly what I would love to see from Drag Race. The theme this week is Pretty in Pink. Show your look, present it on the runway with whatever story you want. We don't need to have these cringe, uncomfortable to watch improv challenges or acting or live singing. I think it's okay to do a band challenge every now and again, or a musical challenge every now and again, or some type of group challenge, or very light acting, maybe even a Q&A in the style of a pageant. But otherwise, I think as many others do, we want to see the looks, we want to see the artistry, we want to see the creative that's behind it all. I don't think any of us want to watch these drag shows and go, oh, I hate this. You know what I mean? So I liked this episode a lot. I would love to see more of this style going forward. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see my thoughts on the last couple challenges of this amazing competition. And if you like Drag Race, that is kind of my bread and butter around here, feel free to check out my Extravaganza Extra program, which allows you to watch some of my posted videos a few days earlier. It is right next to that subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all on the flip.